Irene erased my name from my baby's birth certificate while I lay in the ICU, then smiled and said, "Biology doesn't make you a mother." When I screamed, "She's mine," I grew her. She tilted her head and said, "I'm the only mother Allison has ever known." I didn't say a word. That was 4 months ago. Last night, she sat in her car outside our house, sobbing into her hands. I flatlined twice during my emergency C-section. The infection that followed ate through my body like acid, landing me in the ICU for 3 weeks. While machines kept me alive, Martin's ex-wife Irene moved into my house. "Just temporarily," she told my barely conscious self, squeezing my hand. "New moms need support." Through my morphine haze, I was grateful. Martin looked destroyed. Someone had to help with our newborn daughter Allison. The day I finally came home, my nursery was gone. The yellow walls I'd painted at 7 months pregnant, now stark white. The handmade mobile from my mother vanished. Even Allison's coming home outfit had disappeared. "Babies see contrast better," Irene explained, not meeting my eyes. I donated the old stuff. My legs shook. I reached for my daughter. Irene stepped back. "You need rest," she said, walking away with Allison. "Doctor's orders." That became the pattern. Every time I tried to hold my baby, Irene swooped in. "She just ate. She needs her nap. You're shaking again." Always with Martin watching, relieved someone competent was handling things. 2 weeks later, I dragged myself to Allison's checkup. The receptionist smiled at Irene. "Right on time, Mrs. Collins." My blood froze. During the exam, the pediatrician directed every question to Irene. When I tried to speak, he glanced at her first, seeking permission. "I'm her mother," I whispered. "Of course," he said absently, then turned back to Irene. "Now about those milestones we discussed last visit. I hadn't known there was a last visit. That night, I confronted Martin. He pulled me close, exhausted. "She's just helping. You've been through hell. Don't push yourself." But Irene wasn't helping. She was replacing. I discovered the baby classes she'd enrolled Allison in, under her name. The daycare waitlist application listing Irene as primary guardian. When I tried to correct things, I hit walls. "Oh, Mrs. Collins handles all that," they'd say. I attempted one rebellion. While Irene showered, I bundled Allison up for a walk, made it 3 blocks before Irene appeared, breathless. "Martin texted me," she said, plucking Allison from my arms. "He's worried you're not strong enough yet." 4 months in, I snapped. My mother had been begging to meet Allison. I needed her. Needed someone to see me as a mother. "I'm taking Allison to visit my mom this weekend," I announced at dinner. Irene's fork froze. "That's a long drive for her routine. She'll be fine." Irene shot Martin that look, the one that said, "Handle your wife." "Maybe wait," Martin said carefully, "until you're fully recovered." "I am recovered." "But you're still so fragile," Irene interrupted, her voice dripping concern. "Allison's finally thriving. She knows me, us, her home. A disruption could traumatize her." "She's my daughter," I said. Irene's mask slipped, just for a second, then she smiled. "Of course she is." That night, I planned in secret, packed while they slept. I'd leave at dawn, finally alone with my baby. At 5 a.m., Irene sat in the nursery, Allison in her arms. "I knew you'd try this," she said softly. "Martin's been so worried about your mental state." Irene stood, but didn't hand Allison over. Instead, she picked up a folder from the changing table. "You should see these first." My hands trembled as I opened it. Birth certificate, insurance cards, medical records, daycare registration. Every document listed Irene Collins as Allison's mother. My name appeared nowhere. "That's impossible," I breathed. "You were dying," Irene said gently. "Martin was falling apart. Someone had to handle the paperwork, make sure Allison was protected, insured, documented." She shifted my daughter higher on her hip. He was too distraught to read what he was signing. He trusted me. I made sure this baby had a legal mother, someone responsible, someone who wasn't hooked to machines. Her eyes glittered. "Martin was sleeping in hospital chairs, sobbing in my arms about losing you. He needed comfort. He needed help. He needed someone who could step up and be the mother this baby deserved." I was terrified and screamed at her. "She's mine. I grew her. I birthed her." "Biology doesn't make you a mother," Irene said. "Being here does. Showing up does. And legally," she smiled, "I'm the only mother Allison has ever known." She headed for the door with my daughter. At the threshold, she paused. "Martin doesn't know, of course. He thinks the hospital made clerical errors. Fixing them would require lawyers, DNA tests, court hearings, stress he doesn't need, stress that might make people question your fitness as a mother." She looked me dead in the eye, "Especially with your history of postpartum psychosis." Then she said, "Mama's here. Mama's got you," as she walked out the door. I stood frozen in the nursery doorway, watching Irene disappear down the hallway with my daughter. My legs gave out. I slid down the doorframe, landing hard on the carpet, the folder of forged documents scattered across the floor. Postpartum psychosis. She'd planted that lie too. Martin found me there 20 minutes later, still on the floor, surrounded by papers. He knelt beside me, gathering the documents. His face went pale as he read them. "These have to be mistakes," he muttered, shuffling through insurance cards and medical forms. "The hospital must have mixed things up when you were sick." I watched him study Irene's name where mine should have been. His hands shook slightly. He kept blinking like he could make the words change. "She forged them," I whispered. Martin's jaw tightened. He set the papers down carefully, then helped me to my feet. "You're exhausted. You're seeing things that aren't there. Look at the signatures." I said enough. His voice cracked. "Irene saved us. When you were dying, when I couldn't function, she stepped up. She's not some villain." He left me standing there. I heard him in the kitchen, making coffee, pretending everything was normal. The coffee grinder whirred, cabinets opened and closed, normal morning sounds while my world collapsed. I gathered the documents with trembling hands. Each page revealed another theft. Pediatrician forms listing Irene as primary contact, insurance claims she'd filed, a savings account for Allison's college fund in Irene's name. The front door opened. My mother's voice drifted from the entryway. "Surprise!" I couldn't wait another day to meet my granddaughter. I stumbled out of the nursery. Mom stood in the foyer, arms full of gifts, her face bright with excitement. That brightness dimmed when she saw me. "Sweetheart, you look terrible." Irene appeared at the top of the stairs, Allison perfectly positioned on her hip. She descended slowly, each step deliberate. "Mrs. Patterson, how unexpected." Mom's eyes narrowed at Irene's possessive hold on Allison. She looked between us, reading the tension. "I'm here to see my granddaughter." "Of course." Irene's smile could have cut glass. "Though Allison just went down for her morning nap. Disrupting her schedule causes such fussiness." Mom reached for Allison anyway. Irene stepped back. "I said she's sleeping. She looks awake to me." Mom's voice hardened. Martin emerged from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand. He froze, seeing the standoff. "Mrs. Patterson, we weren't expecting you." "Clearly." Mom kept her eyes on Irene. "Hand me my granddaughter." Irene glanced at Martin. That look again. The one that said, "Your family, your problem." "Mom," I found my voice. "Irene has been helping while I recovered." "Helping?" Mom's tone could have frozen hell. "Is that what we're calling this?" She marched forward, plucked Allison from Irene's arms before anyone could react. Allison gurgled happily, reaching for Mom Mom's earrings. There's my sweet girl, Mom cooed. Then to me, pack a bag, you're coming home with me. She can't, Irene said quickly. She's not well. Martin, tell her. Martin set down his coffee, looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. I saw him catalog my hollow cheeks, my shaking hands, the way I hunched like I expected a blow. Maybe some time away would be good, he said slowly. Irene's mask cracked. Martin, we discussed this. She needs routine, stability, professional help. We discussed? I laughed, sharp and bitter. What else have you two discussed? My mental state? My fitness as a mother? You're being paranoid, Irene said. This is exactly what we were worried about. We? I stepped forward. There is no we. There's me and my husband. You're just the ex-wife who won't leave. Mom shifted Allison to one arm, wrapped the other around me. Martin, what the hell is going on here? He ran his hands through his hair. It's complicated. When she was sick, Irene helped. Maybe too much. But accusing her of forging documents? That's... Show him the bank account, I said to Irene. The one you opened for Allison. Irene's face went still. I was being helpful. With whose money? Martin gave me access to handle expenses while you were hospitalized. I turned to Martin. Did you authorize her to open accounts in her name? His silence was answer enough. Mom headed for the door, Allison secure in her arms. We're leaving. Martin, if you have any sense, you'll figure out what's really happening here. You can't take her, Irene said. I'm her legal guardian. Try me. Mom's voice could have peeled paint. I've raised 3 kids and buried a husband. You think some paperwork scares me? She looked at me. Get your things. I ran upstairs, threw clothes in a bag. My hands shook so badly I could barely zip it. When I came back down, Irene had positioned herself between Mom and the door. This is kidnapping, she said. I'll call the police. Do it, Mom challenged. Explain to them how you became this baby's mother while her actual mother was fighting for her life. Martin stepped between them. Enough. No one's calling anyone. He looked at me. A few days at your mom's might help. Clear your head. Clear her head? Mom laughed. Boy, you need your head cleared. Your wife nearly died giving birth and you let your ex move in and take over? What kind of man does that? Martin flinched. Irene touched his arm, protective, possessive. The gesture was so familiar, so practiced. How long? I asked quietly. How long have you been comforting him, Irene? She pulled her hand back. You're imagining things. Am I? All those nights he cried in your arms while I was dying, all that comfort you provided. Martin's face flushed. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I shouldered my bag. What exactly happened while I was hooked to machines? You were dying. His voice broke. Do you understand that? The doctor said you might not make it. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think. And yes, Irene was there. She held me while I sobbed. She made sure I ate. She handled everything I couldn't. And she made sure to handle it all in her name. I said, that's not fair. Fair? I laughed, harsh and broken. What's fair about any of this? Mom opened the front door. We're done here. Martin, when you're ready to be a husband instead of a child, you know where to find us. Irene made one last grab for Allison. Mom blocked her with her body. Touch my granddaughter again without permission, and we'll see how those forged documents hold up in court. We left them standing in the doorway. I didn't look back. Couldn't. If I had, I might have seen Martin's face crumble. Might have seen Irene's hand on his shoulder, already consoling. The drive to Mom's took 3 hours. Allison slept most of the way, peaceful in her car seat. I sat in the back with her, memorizing her face. 4 months of her life, stolen. 4 months of firsts I'd missed while Irene played mother. Mom glanced at me in the rearview mirror. How long has this been going on? Mom just swooped in like a superhero and saved the day. I love how she saw right through everything and didn't buy any of Irene's fake nice act. Did you guys also catch how Martin finally admitted that Irene was holding him and comforting him while his wife was dying? That's so messed up, bro. Since I came home from the hospital, maybe before, I stroked Allison's cheek. She had everything planned. Every document, every appointment, every detail. And Martin? He's not stupid, just weak. The truth hurt to say. When I was dying, he needed someone strong. Irene was there. Being there doesn't give her the right to steal your life. No, but it gave her the opportunity. We stopped for gas. I carried Allison inside to change her. The bathroom was small, dingy, but it was the first time I'd been alone with my daughter in weeks. I held her close, breathed in her baby smell, felt her tiny fingers wrap around mine. I'm your mama, I whispered, no matter what any paper says. She gurgled, blowing spit bubbles. Such a simple thing, but Irene had made me doubt even this. Made me question if I was strong enough, stable enough, good enough. Back in the car, Mom handed me her phone. Call your lawyer friend, the one from college. I can't afford a lawyer. I can. Her tone brooked no argument. That woman stole your child. We're getting her back. I stared at the phone. Starting this fight meant admitting how far I'd let things go, how weak I'd been, how I'd failed to protect my own daughter. What if she's right? The words tumbled out. What if I'm not fit to be a mother? I couldn't even stop her from taking over. Mom pulled over, turned to face me fully. You nearly died. You spent 3 weeks fighting to live so you could come back to that baby. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing a mother can do. But I let her. You were recovering from trauma, physical and emotional. That woman took advantage when you were vulnerable. That's on her, not you. I looked at Allison, sleeping peacefully. What if Martin fights me, takes her side? Then he's not the man you married. Mom's voice gentled. But I don't think he's that far gone. Confused, maybe. Manipulated, definitely. But he looked sick when he saw those documents. My phone buzzed. Martin's name appeared. Then again, and again. I didn't answer. At Mom's house, everything smelled like cinnamon and coffee. The same furniture, the same photos on the walls. A life frozen in time while mine had shattered. Mom set up the old crib in my childhood room, the one all 3 of us kids had used. Sturdy, simple, safe. Nothing like the designer nursery Irene had created. She redecorated everything, I said, laying Allison down. Throughout all the things I'd chosen. Control. Mom covered Allison with a hand-knit blanket. She needed to erase you to insert herself. My phone rang again. This time, Irene's name appeared. Don't, Mom warned, but I answered. Needed to hear her voice without Martin as buffer. You've upset him terribly, she said without preamble. He's been crying since you left. Good. This isn't you. This anger, this paranoia. It's the trauma talking. Come home. We can work through this together. There is no together, Irene. There's my family, and there's you. Interfering. Interfering? Her laugh was cold. I saved your daughter's life while you were unconscious. Who do you think fed her? Changed her? Comforted her when she cried? Martin was useless with grief. If I hadn't stepped in, child services would have taken her. That's a lie. Is it? A father who couldn't function. A mother who might die. No family support for weeks. What do you think would have happened? My stomach churned. The hospital would have helped. There are systems that would have put Allison in foster care while they sorted out the mess. I prevented that. I made sure she stayed in her home with people who loved her. You stole her. I saved her. Her voice hardened. And if you try to fight me on this, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly how unfit you are. The nurses who saw you screaming in the ICU, the doctors who noted your confusion, your delusions, the social worker who expressed concerns about your mental state. You're threatening me? I'm protecting Allison from a mother who abandoned her for 3 weeks, who came home unstable, who kidnapped her today way against her legal guardian's wishes. I didn't abandon her. I was dying. The courts won't see the difference, especially when I have documentation of every feeding, every diaper change, every milestone you missed. When I show them how you tried to disrupt her routine, take her from the only stable home she's known. My hands shook. Martin won't let you do this. Martin trusts me. He's seen how hard this has been on you, how you've struggled. He wants what's best for Allison, and right now, that's me. You're in love with him. The words came out flat, certain, silence. Then, I never stopped loving him. He was mine first. The divorce was a mistake, one I've been correcting. By stealing his child? By being the partner he needs. The mother his child deserves. You were an interruption, nothing more. I hung up, threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall, cracked, went silent. Mom appeared in the doorway. That bad? She's going to fight for custody. Says she has documentation that I'm unfit. Let her try. Mom sat beside me on the bed. We'll fight back. Every doctor who saved your life will testify. Every nurse who saw you fight to survive. That trumps her forged papers. What if it doesn't? What if she's built too strong a case? Then we build a stronger one. Mom pulled me close. You're not alone in this. You have me. You have your brothers. We're going to expose what she's done. And Martin? That's up to him. He can choose his ex-wife's lies or his actual wife's truth. I looked at Allison, peaceful in her crib, 4 months old and already caught in adult drama. I just want to be her mother. You are her mother. No piece of paper changes that. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Irene walking away with Allison. Heard her saying, "Mama's here." The words I should have been saying. I sat by the crib, watching Allison breathe. Such a tiny person, unaware of the battle raging around her. She'd spent more conscious hours with Irene than with me. Did she recognize my voice anymore? My smell? Or had I become the stranger Irene painted me as? My phone, cracked but functional, showed 17 missed calls. Mostly Martin. 2 from Irene, 1 from a number I didn't recognize. I listened to Martin's voicemails in the dark. First message, "Please call me. We need to talk about this rationally." Third message, I looked at the documents, really looked. Some of these dates don't make sense. Call me. Fifth message, Irene says you're having an episode, that your mom is enabling delusions. I don't know what to believe anymore. 10th message, I found more papers in Irene's room. Why does she have a room? When did I agree to that? God, what's happening? Last message, I'm coming to get you both tomorrow. We need to sort this out as a family. Our family, not I'm coming. I deleted them all. The unknown number had left a voicemail too. A woman's voice, nervous but determined. Hi, you don't know me. I'm Sarah from the pediatrician's office. I probably shouldn't be calling, but I've been worried about the situation with Mrs. Collins. I mean, the other Mrs. Collins. Look, some things haven't sat right with me. If you want to talk, I'm here. I saved that one. Morning came too soon. Allison woke hungry, and I fed her a bottle while Mom made breakfast. Such a normal moment, but it felt like a miracle. Just me and my daughter, no one hovering, no one judging. Martin called the house line, Mom said, setting down eggs and toast. He's on his way. I don't want to see him. You need to. Whether you stay married or not, he's Allison's father. You have to find a way forward. What if he takes her back to Irene? Then we'll know where he stands. Mom's face was grim, but I don't think he will. That last voicemail sounded like a man waking up. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Allison dozed in my arms, milk hammered and content. I'd missed so many feedings, so many quiet moments like this. The doorbell rang at noon. Mom went to answer while I stayed frozen in the kitchen, clutching Allison. Through the archway, I watched Martin step inside, his appearance shocking me. His usually neat hair stuck up at odd angles. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His shirt was wrinkled, mismatched with his pants. He spotted me immediately, took a step forward, then stopped. His gaze moved between Allison and me, something raw and desperate in his expression. Mom positioned herself strategically between us, arms crossed. Martin's hands shook as he pushed them through his hair. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally managed to speak. His words came out rushed, tumbling over each other. I caught fragments about finding more documents, about Irene's room, about not understanding how things had gotten so twisted. Mom held up a hand, cutting him off. She informed him that his wife needed time to process everything, that showing up unannounced wasn't helping. Martin's face crumpled. He sank onto Mom's couch, head in his hands. I watched him fall apart, feeling nothing. No sympathy, no anger, just emptiness. Allison stirred in my arms, making soft baby noises. Martin's head snapped up at the sound, his eyes hungry as they fixed on our daughter. He asked to hold her. The request hung in the air between us. Mom looked at me, waiting for my decision. I found myself walking forward, each step deliberate. Martin's hands reached out eagerly. I stopped just out of reach. Asked him about the papers he'd signed, about the accounts, about how his ex-wife had a room in our house. His eager expression faltered. He started explaining about the chaos of those first days, how Irene had appeared with forms needing immediate attention for insurance, for the pediatrician, for everything. His voice grew smaller as he admitted he'd signed without reading. Trusted her because she'd seemed so competent while he was drowning. He'd been grateful someone was handling the details while his world imploded. I asked when she'd moved in, not visited, moved in. Martin's brow furrowed. He couldn't pinpoint exactly when her overnight bag had become a closet full of clothes, when the guest room had become Irene's room. It had happened gradually, he said, like everything else. Mom interjected, asking if he'd ever questioned why his ex-wife was making herself so permanently comfortable in his home. Martin's jaw worked. He admitted he'd been relieved. Ashamed now, but relieved then. Someone was taking care of things. Someone who knew what they were doing. I shifted Allison higher on my shoulder, asked if he'd noticed how Irene never let me near my own daughter. His silence stretched. Finally, he admitted he'd thought it was for the best. I'd seemed so fragile. Irene had seemed so capable. The doorbell rang again. We all froze. Mom went to check, returning with a concerned expression. Irene stood on the porch, she reported, demanding to see Martin, insisting this had gone on long enough. Martin rose, but I grabbed his arm, told him that if he let her in, if he chose her version of reality over mine, we were done. He looked at me, really looked, and something shifted in his expression. He went to the door. I heard low voices, Irene's growing shrill. Martin's responses were firm, harder than I'd heard him speak to her before. The conversation moved outside. Through the window, I watched them on the porch, Irene gesticulating wildly while Martin stood with arms crossed. She pulled out her phone, waving it at him. Even from inside, I could see her mouth forming threats. Martin took the phone, looked at whatever she was showing him, then handed it back. His response was brief. Irene's face went red. She tried to push past him toward the door. Martin blocked her. The sight was so unexpected, I nearly dropped Allison. Yes! Martin is finally standing up to Irene and blocking her from getting inside. I can't believe he actually stopped her at the door when she tried to push past him. This is the first time we've seen him really try to protect his family. This is a nice turning point because Martin is finally seeing how Irene just slowly took over their whole house without him even noticing. Martin, who'd been letting Irene call every shot for months, physically preventing her from entering. Mom moved beside me at the window. We watched Irene's mask completely shatter better. She was screaming now, though we couldn't make out words. Martin remained immovable. Finally, Irene spun on her heel and stormed to her car, but she didn't leave. She sat there, engine running, staring at the house, waiting. Martin came back inside, his face grim. He explained that Irene had shown him texts she claimed I'd sent, full of paranoid accusations and threats, messages I'd never written. When he'd pointed out the timestamps were from when I was still in the ICU, she'd changed tactics, insisting I'd become dangerous. I pulled out my cracked phone, showed him my actual sent messages. The discrepancy was obvious. Martin's expression darkened further. He asked to see the forged documents again. Mom retrieved them from where I'd left them in my room. Martin spread them across the coffee table, really examining them this time. His finger traced dates, signatures, official stamps. His face grew paler with each page. He pointed out impossibilities I hadn't noticed. Documents dated when he'd been at the hospital with me. Forms requiring both parents' signatures bearing only his, in handwriting that wasn't quite right. A savings account opened the day after Allison's birth, when he'd been sleeping in a chair beside my ICU bed. The scope of Irene's deception was staggering, but more disturbing was how easily she'd managed it, how readily systems had accepted her in my place, how quickly I'd been erased. Martin's phone rang. Irene's name flashed on the screen. He declined the call. It rang again immediately, and again. He turned it off. I asked what happened to the man who'd defended Irene just yesterday, who'd insisted she'd saved us. Martin's shoulders slumped. He talked about waking up that morning in a house that didn't feel like his anymore, about realizing Irene had been making breakfast in his kitchen for months, about finding legal documents in her room, documents about Allison he'd never seen, her room. The phrase stuck in his throat. When had the guest room become hers? When had she gotten a key? When had her temporary help become permanent residence? Mom suggested we call that Sarah from the pediatrician's office, the woman who'd left the voicemail. I hesitated, then dialed. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice nervous but determined. She agreed to meet us at a coffee shop nearby, said she had information we needed to hear, information about Irene's visits to the pediatrician, about forms that hadn't seemed right, about a mother who'd never once asked about her baby. An hour later, we sat across from Sarah in a back corner booth. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with kind eyes and fidgeting hands. She kept glancing around as if Irene might materialize. Sarah pulled out a folder. Inside were photocopies of forms, appointment records, notes. She'd risked her job copying these, she said, but her conscience wouldn't let her stay quiet. The records showed Irene bringing Allison for appointments I'd known nothing about, extra visits between scheduled checkups, requests for documentation of developmental concerns, notes about the biological mother's mental health issues. Sarah pointed to specific entries. Irene had been building a case, creating a paper trail suggesting Allison needed special care, that I was unstable, that she was the only reliable caregiver. The pediatrician had started including these concerns in official records, but Sarah had noticed discrepancies. Irene's stories changed. Details didn't match. Most telling, she'd claimed I was too ill to visit, yet Sarah had seen me at that one appointment, very much trying to be involved. Martin studied the papers, his expression darkening. He recognized his signatures on forms he didn't remember signing, consent for evaluations he'd never discussed. Irene had been getting him to sign things mixed in with other paperwork, counting on his distraction and trust. Sarah revealed more. Irene had asked about processes for changing custody arrangements, about what would happen if a biological mother was deemed unfit, about how to establish herself as the psychological parent. The term made my skin crawl. Psychological parent. As if love could be documented and filed. As if 4 months of manipulation could erase 9 months of pregnancy and a lifetime of dreams. Sarah had one more thing. She pulled out her phone, showed us a recording she'd made of Irene in the waiting room. The video was grainy, but the audio was clear. Irene was on the phone, discussing her plans with someone. Her words were careful, but the intent was obvious. She was strategizing how to make her position permanent. We sat in stunned silence after the recording ended. The calculated nature of it all was breathtaking. This wasn't a woman who'd stepped up in a crisis and overstepped boundaries. This was a planned takeover. Mom asked Sarah why she'd risked so much to help us. Sarah's answer was simple. She'd watched her own mother lose custody in a manipulated situation. She couldn't stand by and watch it happen again. We thanked Sarah profusely. She left quickly, nervous about being seen with us. As she went, she mentioned that other staff had noticed things too. People who might speak up if asked. Back at Mom's house, we found Irene's car gone, but the relief was short-lived. My phone, Martin's phone, and Mom's landline all started ringing simultaneously. Different numbers, but we knew who was behind it. The messages were escalating. Threats about custody, claims about my mental state, promises to involve authorities. Each voicemail more unhinged than the last. Irene was spiraling. Her careful control shattered. Martin made a decision. He called a locksmith, arranged to have the locks changed at our house immediately. Then he called the bank, started the process of freezing the accounts Irene had access to. Each call was painful, admitting to strangers how badly he'd been manipulated. While he handled logistics, I sat with Allison, trying to process everything. 4 months of my daughter's life stolen. But more than that, 4 months of gaslighting so thorough I'd questioned my own sanity. Every time I'd reached for my baby and been rebuffed. Every appointment I'd been excluded from. Every moment Irene had played mother while I watched from the sidelines. Mom made dinner while we worked. Simple soup and sandwiches, but the normalcy of it grounded me. This was what family looked like. Not Irene's performance of care, but quiet support and presence. As we ate, Martin's phone buzzed with texts. He'd turned it back on to handle the logistics, and Irene was bombarding him. He showed us some of them. They ranged from pleading to threatening to bizarrely seductive. Years of marriage reduced to desperate manipulation. One text stopped us cold. Irene claimed she was pregnant, that Martin was the father, that they'd been together while I was in the hospital. The timing was impossible, Martin said immediately. He'd barely left my bedside, but the accusation hung in the air, poisonous. I watched Martin's face as he processed this new low, watched him realize how far Irene would go. The man who'd defended her just yesterday was gone, replaced by someone seeing clearly for the first time. He called his lawyer, left a detailed message about the situation, the forged documents, the false pregnancy claim. His voice was steady, but his hands shook. When he hung up, he looked at me with haunted eyes. The locksmith called. He was at our house, but Irene was there, claiming to be the homeowner. She was refusing to leave, threatening to call the police on him. Martin spoke to the locksmith, then to Irene when she grabbed the phone. The conversation was brief and harsh. Martin told her she had 1 hour to pack her things and leave, or he'd be the one calling the police. We decided to go to the house together. Mom stayed with Allison, insisting we needed to handle this as a united front. The drive was tense, neither of us speaking. So much damage in such a short time. When we arrived, Irene's car was in the driveway, trunk open. Through the window, we could see her moving through the house, grabbing things. The locksmith waited nervously by his his van. Martin approached him, showed ID, confirmed the work order. I stayed by the car, watching Irene through the windows. She was taking more than her belongings. I saw her grab picture frames, Allison's toys, even small furniture pieces. Martin noticed too. He went inside while I waited with the locksmith. Raised voices carried through the walls. A crash. Then Martin emerged, carrying a box of baby items Irene had been trying to take. His face was stone. Irene followed, her carefully styled appearance finally cracking. Mascara streaked her cheeks. Her perfect hair was disheveled. She looked between us, and for a moment, I saw something human in her eyes. Fear, desperation, loss. But then her gaze hardened. She walked to her car with rigid dignity, placed one last box in the trunk, and turned back to us. Her words were quiet but vicious. She promised this wasn't over, that she had rights, that Allison needed her, that we'd regret this. Martin stepped forward, blocking her view of me, told her to leave and not come back. Any communication would go through lawyers. Any attempt to contact us directly would be considered harassment. Irene laughed, bitter and sharp, reminded him of all she'd done, how she'd held everything together, how she'd been the only functional adult for months, how Allison knew her as mother. That last bit nearly broke my composure, but Martin's response was firm. Allison would know her real mother now, the woman who'd nearly died bringing her into the world, the woman who'd fought to get back to her, the woman Irene had tried to erase. Irene's mask finally shattered completely. She screamed at us, words pouring out in a toxic flood, years of resentment about their divorce, jealousy over Martin moving on, rage that I'd stolen him. The baby had been her chance to fix everything, to show him what he'd lost, to prove she was the better choice. The confession was stunning in its clarity. This had never been about helping. It had been about winning, about reclaiming what she thought was hers. Allison had just been a tool in her twisted game. Martin recorded the entire rant on his phone. Evidence, he said quietly when she finally ran out of words. Irene realized what he'd done, lunged for the phone, but he stepped back. She stood there, breathing hard, reality crashing down. Finally, she got in her car and left. We watched until her taillights disappeared, then Martin turned to the locksmith. Time to change every lock, time to reclaim our home. Inside, the house felt different. Irene's presence lingered like smoke. Her things were gone from the guest room, but indentations in the carpet showed where she'd added furniture. The kitchen had been rearranged to her preferences. Even the living room reflected her taste, not ours. But the nursery was the worst. My beautiful yellow room remained white and sterile. The handmade decorations I'd created were still gone. Everything was expensive and cold, designed for show rather than comfort. This wasn't a room where a mother rocked her baby. It was a stage for Irene's performance. Martin found me standing in the doorway, tears streaming down my face. He wrapped his arms around me, and for the first time in months, I let myself be held. We stood there, grieving what had been stolen, what had been broken, what would need to be rebuilt. The locksmith finished his work, leaving us with new keys. The simple weight of them felt monumental. Our house was ours again, but making it our home would take time. Martin recording Irene's complete meltdown on his phone was so smart, and now they have proof of everything she just admitted. I cannot believe she actually confessed that she was using baby Allison as a tool to win Martin back, and that whole fake pregnancy lie was fucking disgusting. We returned to Mom's house to find her walking Allison around the living room, singing softly. My daughter was alert, content, unaware of the drama surrounding her. Mom handed her to me without hesitation, and I felt the rightness of her weight in my arms. Martin watched us, something broken and healing in his expression. He asked if we'd come home. Not tonight, I told him. Maybe not for a while, but eventually, when the house felt safe again, when I trusted that Irene was truly gone, when I believed in us again. He understood, said he'd stay at the house, start undoing Irene's changes, make it ours again, make it ready for when we came home. The separation hurt, but it felt necessary. We both needed to find our footing. That night, I gave Allison her bath in Mom's old tub. Such a simple thing, but Irene had taken even this from me. She'd always swooped in, claiming I wasn't steady enough, wasn't careful enough, wasn't good enough. Now, with no one watching, no one judging, I could just be Allison's mother. Mom helped, but didn't take over. Showed me tricks she'd used with us as babies, shared stories of her own early motherhood fears. The continuity was comforting. Generations of mothers, all figuring it out as they went. After Allison was asleep, I called the lawyer friend Mom had mentioned, left a detailed message about our situation, the forged documents, the recordings, the confession. The lawyer called back within an hour, her voice sharp with interest. She outlined our options. The forged documents were criminal, but prosecuting would be complex. Better to focus on establishing my rights, correcting the false records, ensuring Irene had no legal claim. It would take time, but the evidence was strong. I asked about Irene's threats to claim I was unfit. The lawyer wasn't concerned. My medical records showed a life-threatening infection, not mental illness. The timing of the forged documents would work in our favor. Sarah's testimony about Irene's manipulation would be crucial. Most importantly, I was clearly capable and caring for Allison now. We scheduled a meeting for the next day. I hung up feeling something I hadn't in months. Hope, not just for surviving this, but for truly reclaiming my life. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My stomach dropped, expecting Irene from a new phone, but it was Martin. He'd sent a photo from our house, the nursery, with paint cans stacked in the corner, yellow paint. He was starting to undo her changes. I stared at the photo, tears blurring my vision. Such a small gesture, but it meant everything. He was choosing us, choosing to rebuild rather than defend what had been broken. Another text followed, this time a photo of the guest room, completely empty. Not just Irene's belongings gone, but the furniture too. A blank slate, a room that would never be hers again. I showed Mom the photos. She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her since this started. Maybe Martin would prove himself after all, she said. Maybe this would make us stronger. Maybe Irene had inadvertently done us a favor by showing us what we were fighting for. The next morning brought new challenges. Irene had been busy overnight. My social media was flooded with messages from mutual friends asking if I was okay. Irene had told them I'd had a breakdown, that I'd kidnapped Allison, that she was worried for the baby's safety. The smear campaign was strategic. Make me defend myself, make others question my stability, create a narrative where she was the concerned caregiver and I was the dangerous mother. But Irene had miscalculated. These were my friends too. People who'd watched me prepare for motherhood with joy, who'd sent cards during my hospitalization, who'd wondered why I'd been so absent since coming home. I spent the morning making calls, explaining the truth, sharing select details about the forged documents. Most were horrified on my behalf. Some admitted Irene had seemed oddly possessive of Allison. Others mentioned feeling uncomfortable with how she'd spoken about me. One friend, Benji, revealed something disturbing. Irene had approached her weeks ago about testifying to my instability, had asked her to write a statement about concerning behavior she'd witnessed. When Benji had refused, saying she'd seen no such thing, Irene had gotten angry, accused her of enabling me. The pattern was clear. Irene Irene had been building her case for months, but her desperation had made her sloppy. Too many people had seen through her act. Too many had questioned why Martin's ex-wife was so involved. The lawyer meeting that afternoon was productive. She'd reviewed the documents I'd sent, consulted with colleagues. The forged signatures were provable, the fraudulent accounts actionable. Irene's recorded confession was damning, but the lawyer warned me this wouldn't be quick or easy. Irene would fight. She'd invested too much to give up easily. We needed to be prepared for escalation, for false accusations, for any desperate move she might make. I asked about protecting Allison. The lawyer outlined steps for emergency custody orders if needed, ways to document Irene's harassment, legal remedies if she attempted contact. The system that had failed to protect me could be used to shield my daughter. Martin met us at the lawyer's office. He brought more evidence. Credit card statements showing Irene's purchases for the nursery, charged to accounts she shouldn't have accessed, phone records proving his location during her false pregnancy claim window, his own journal from those early days, documenting his grief and Irene's increasing presence. The lawyer took everything, building our case methodically. By the time we left, I felt armed for battle. Not the kind fought with anger and accusations, but with truth and documentation. Outside the office, Martin asked to talk. We sat on a bench while Mom waited in the car with Allison. He looked exhausted, but clearer than he had in months. He talked about the guilt, how he'd failed me when I needed him most, how he'd let grief and fear make him weak, how Irene had seemed like salvation when she was actually predation. I listened without interrupting. His pain was real, but so was mine. His weakness had cost us months of our daughter's life, had nearly cost me everything. Forgiveness would come maybe, but not yet. He understood, didn't push, just asked what he could do now, how he could prove himself, how he could earn back trust. Actions, I told him. Not words, not promises. Actions. Every day, choosing us over ease. Every decision, putting our family first. Every moment, being the partner and father he'd failed to be. He nodded, accepting the challenge. Then he told me something that chilled me. Irene had called his work, told his boss I was unstable, that he might need time off to deal with a family crisis. The manipulation was expanding beyond our personal circle, but Martin had handled it, told his boss the truth, warned HR about potential harassment, documented everything. He was learning, adapting, fighting back in ways he hadn't before. We returned to Mom's house to find a package on the porch. No return address. Inside, baby clothes. The ones I'd bought before Allison was born, the ones Irene had claimed to donate. A note in her handwriting. She'll always be mine. The threat was clear. She wasn't giving up, but neither was I. I photographed everything, sent it to the lawyer. More evidence, more proof of her obsession. That evening, I sat with Allison on Mom's porch, watching the sunset. My daughter was alert, tracking the light, occasionally grasping at the air. 4 months old and already showing personality. 4 months I'd missed so much of. But we had time now, years ahead of us. First steps, first words, first days of school. All the moments Irene had tried to steal. They were mine to claim now, ours to share. Mom joined us, bringing tea. We sat in comfortable silence, 3 generations of women on a porch. The simplicity of it was healing. No performance, no judgment, just presence. My phone buzzed. Sarah from the pediatrician's office. She'd talked to her supervisor about the situation. They were reviewing all of Irene's documentation, questioning the validity of her claims, considering whether to report the suspected fraud to authorities. The tide was turning, slowly, but definitely. Truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried under months of lies. Martin texted photos of the nursery progress. He'd primed the walls, ready for yellow paint, found some of my original decorations in the garage, even located the mobile my mother had made, hidden in a box labeled donation. Each recovered item felt like a small victory, proof that erasure isn't permanent, that what's stolen can be reclaimed, that starting over doesn't mean accepting defeat. As darkness fell, I carried Allison inside. Bath time, feeding, the gentle routine of motherhood. Actions Irene had gatekept for months. Now they were mine, unremarkable and precious. Mom helped without hovering, offered support without taking over, showed me what healthy help looked like, what Irene's twisted version had corrupted. After Allison was asleep, I sat at Mom's kitchen table writing, documenting everything I could remember, every incident, every red flag, every moment of doubt. The lawyer wanted a timeline, but this was more than evidence. It was reclamation. Writing it out, I saw the pattern more clearly, how calculated it had all been, how each small boundary violation had paved the way for larger thefts, how my vulnerability had been weaponized against me. But I also saw my own strength, how I'd fought through infection and near death, how I'd known something was wrong even when everyone dismissed my concerns, how I'd finally found the courage to leave, to seek help, to fight back. Mom read over my shoulder, occasionally adding her own observations, things she'd noticed in my voice during phone calls, the way I'd shrunk into myself, the absence of joy when I talked about motherhood. We stayed up late, building the narrative together. By the time we finished, I had 20 pages of detailed notes. Evidence, yes, but also testimony. Proof that I'd never given up, even when giving up would have been easier. The next morning brought more fallout. Irene had been contacting everyone. Martin's family asking them to intervene. My doctors requesting records. Even Allison's future daycare, trying to maintain her position as primary contact. But each attempt backfired. Martin's family, who'd always found Irene difficult, sided with us. My doctors refused to release records without proper authorization. The daycare, alerted to the situation, removed Irene from all documentation. Her desperation was showing. The careful manipulator was making mistakes, leaving voicemails that revealed her instability, sending emails that documented her harassment, creating the very evidence we needed to protect ourselves. Martin called with updates throughout the day. He'd hired professional painters to finish the nursery quickly, arranged for a security system installation, even started therapy to understand how he'd been so thoroughly manipulated. The changes were tangible, not just promises but actions, not just words but transformation. He was becoming the partner I'd needed months ago, late but not too late. That afternoon, I took Allison to a Mommy and Me class Mom had found, my first public outing as her mother without Irene's shadow. I was nervous, expecting judgment or questions. Instead, I found warmth. Other mothers who understood the challenge of new parenthood, who shared their own struggles with identity and confidence, who welcomed us without reservation. Allison seemed to enjoy the sensory activities, watched the other babies with interest, responded to the songs and movements. Just a normal baby at a normal class with her normal mother. The instructor approached after class, said she was glad to finally meet me. Apparently, Irene had brought Allison before, but something had seemed off. The way she'd spoken about the biological mother had raised concerns. Another ally, another person who'd seen through the facade. The network of support I'd thought I'd lost was still there, waiting for truth to emerge. We returned to Mom's house to find Martin's car in the driveway. He was on the porch with Mom, deep in conversation. Both looked serious but not hostile. Mom had been questioning him, not attacking, but understanding, trying to piece together how they'd reached this point. Martin was answering honestly, not deflecting or defending. He'd brought something, a box of my things from the house, items Irene had hidden rather than discarded, pregnancy journals, ultrasound photos, the outfit I'd planned for Allison's first photo shoot, pieces of my journey to motherhood I thought were gone. But more importantly, he'd brought clarity. He'd spent the day reviewing their divorce papers, looking for anything that might give Irene leverage. Instead, he'd found the opposite. Clear language about boundaries, about separate lives, about moving forward. She had no legal claim to our life, no right to insert herself, no foundation for her threats. Everything she'd built was on sand, ready to collapse under legal scrutiny. The relief was overwhelming. I'd been so afraid she'd find some loophole, some technicality, but her power had always been illusion, dependent on our ignorance and fear. Martin didn't ask to stay, didn't assume forgiveness, just delivered what he'd found and prepared to leave. But I stopped him, asked him to stay for dinner. Not reconciliation, not yet, but a step. We ate together, the four of us around Mom's table. Allison in her high chair, making happy noises and spreading mashed sweet potato everywhere. A messy, imperfect, real family dinner. No performance, no careful staging, no one swooping in to clean up immediately. Just life, happening naturally, the way it should have been all along. After dinner, Martin helped with dishes while I bathed Allison. Mom supervised both activities with amused authority. The domesticity was strange, but not unwelcome. Practice for whatever came next. Before leaving, Martin showed me his phone. 17 missed calls from Irene, dozens of texts, each one more unhinged than the last. He'd documented everything, forwarded it all to his lawyer. She was escalating because she was losing. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling. The baby she'd claimed, the man she'd wanted back, the life she'd stolen, all slipping away. But her escalation was also evidence. Proof of harassment, of instability, of the very things she'd tried to project onto me. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Martin left with a promise to update the security system passwords once installed, to keep documenting any contact attempts, to continue therapy and rebuilding. After he'd gone, Mom and I processed the day. The progress, the revelations, the slow shift in dynamics. She was cautiously optimistic. People could change, she said, if they truly wanted to. I was less certain but willing to see. Trust would take time. Healing would take longer. But for Allison's sake, I'd try. A broken family carefully mended might be stronger than one that had never been tested. That night, I dreamed of yellow walls, of hanging my mother's mobile over Allison's crib, of walking through my own front door without fear. Simple dreams, but for months they'd seemed impossible. Morning brought a call from the lawyer. She'd filed the initial paperwork to correct the fraudulent documents, sent cease and desist letters to Irene, started the process of reclaiming my legal identity as Allison's mother. The wheels of justice moved slowly, but they were moving. Each document filed was a step toward resolution. Each legal action, a brick in the wall protecting us from Irene's delusions. I spent the morning playing with Allison on Mom's living room floor. Tummy time, which she tolerated with increasing patience. Toy grasping, which delighted her. Simple interactions that Irene had made seemed dangerous. My daughter was thriving, not because of expert handling or perfect routines, but because she was loved, because she was finally experiencing the mother she'd been denied. Mom took photos, documenting these moments. Evidence of my competence, yes, but more importantly, memories. The kind every mother should have. The kind Irene had tried to steal. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, fearing another attack, but it was a nurse from the hospital where I'd nearly died. She'd heard about my situation through Sarah's network. She remembered me, remembered my fight to survive, remembered how I'd begged for updates about my baby even when barely conscious. No one who'd witnessed that could doubt my fitness as a mother. She offered to provide a statement if needed, to testify about my determination to live for my daughter, to counter any narrative about abandonment or unfitness. Another ally, another crack in Irene's facade. The truth was emerging from unexpected places, carried by people who'd stayed silent too long. I need to create an ending that resolves the identity theft, maternal rights conflict through family dynamics only, maintaining 97% action until the final moments. The nurse's call energized me in ways I hadn't expected. That afternoon, while Allison napped, I compiled everything. Sarah's recordings, the forged documents, Martin's evidence, the threatening messages. Mom helped organize it all into a clear timeline. Martin texted updates from the house. He'd found more of Irene's manipulations, a folder hidden in the guest room closet containing drafts of the forged documents, practice signatures, notes about my supposed mental state. Each discovery deepened his horror at how blind he'd been. That evening, Irene showed up at Mom's house. We watched through the window as she paced the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear. She didn't approach the door, just walked back and forth, gesturing wildly. Mom drew the curtains, but we could still hear her voice rising and falling. My phone buzzed with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Irene had recruited friends, distant relatives, anyone who might pressure me. Each message followed the same script: concern for Allison's welfare, questions about my stability, suggestions that I was being influenced by my mother. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded everything to the lawyer, building our case one message at a time. Mom made dinner while I documented, keeping one eye on the window where Irene continued her vigil. After an hour, Irene finally left, but the damage was spreading. Martin called to report that she'd contacted his parents, spinning tales of my breakdown. His mother, who'd never liked Irene, had hung up on her. His father was less certain, worried about his granddaughter. The next morning brought a new development. The pediatrician's office called. They'd completed their review of Irene's documentation. The inconsistencies were significant enough that they were removing her as Allison's contact and correcting their records. They needed me to come in to verify information. Mom stayed home with Allison while I went to the appointment. The office manager met me personally, apologetic about the situation. She showed me the forms Irene had submitted. The forgeries were obvious now that someone was looking. Different ink colors, inconsistent handwriting, dates that didn't align with Allison's actual appointments. They corrected everything while I waited. My name restored to every form, my phone number replacing Irene's, my signature where it should have been all along. Each correction felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. On the drive home, I passed our house. Martin's car was in the driveway, along with a painter's van. Through the window, I could see yellow walls emerging in the nursery. He was keeping his promise, action by action. I almost stopped, almost went inside to see the transformation, but I wasn't ready. The house still felt like Irene's domain, even with her gone. I needed more time before I could walk through that door without feeling like an intruder in my own home. Back at Mom's, I found Martin on the porch with Allison. He'd arrived while I was gone, wanting to spend time with his daughter. Mom supervised from the doorway, protective but allowing the interaction. Martin had brought something, a USB drive containing security footage from our house. He'd installed cameras weeks ago, he explained, when things things started feeling wrong. The footage showed Irene's activities when we weren't home, her going through my belongings, practicing my signature, even trying on my clothes. The violation ran deeper than I'd imagined. She hadn't just wanted my role as Allison's mother. She'd wanted to become me, to erase me completely and step into my life. The footage made it undeniable. That afternoon, Irene escalated again. She arrived at the house while Martin was there, demanding entry. The security footage captured everything: her pounding on the door, her screaming about her rights, her attempt to break a window when Martin wouldn't let her in. Martin called the police, not to press charges, but to document the incident. They arrived to find Irene in the driveway, ranting about kidnapping and custody. The officers, seeing no immediate danger, simply took a report and suggested both parties communicate through lawyers. But the incident had been witnessed. Neighbors had watched from their windows. The painter had heard everything. Irene's carefully maintained image was cracking in public view. That evening, Martin brought dinner to Mom's house. We ate together, discussing next steps. The lawyer had reviewed everything and was confident we could get the fraudulent documents corrected without a lengthy battle. Irene had no legal standing, especially with her recent behavior documented. After dinner, I made a decision. I called Benji, the friend who'd revealed Irene's attempt to recruit her, asked if she'd be willing to write a statement about what Irene had asked her to do. Benji agreed immediately, angry that she'd almost been used in the manipulation. Within hours, Benji had sent a detailed account, how Irene had approached her, the specific lies she'd wanted Benji to support. The pressure applied when Benji refused. It was another piece of evidence, another crack in Irene's fabricated narrative. The next day, I felt strong enough to return to the house with Martin. Mom came too, Allison secure in her arms. I needed to see the changes, to begin reclaiming my space. The nursery took my breath away. The yellow walls were exactly the shade I'd chosen months ago. Martin had found most of my decorations, carefully restored and rehung. The mobile my mother made spun gently above the crib, but it was the small details that broke me. The rocking chair I'd picked out back in its corner, the bookshelf filled with the stories I'd collected, even the tiny outfit I'd bought for Allison's first photo shoot, washed and waiting in the drawer. Martin had also found something else, a journal Irene had hidden. In it, she'd documented her plan, how she'd waited for an opportunity, how my illness had seemed like fate, how she'd carefully built her case while I fought for my life. The most chilling entries were about Martin, how she'd never stopped loving him, how she'd seen his grief as an opening, how she'd planned to comfort him into forgetting me. Allison had been the key to keeping them connected, the excuse to never leave. Reading it, I understood the full scope of her delusion. This wasn't just about stealing my baby, it was about stealing my entire life. I cannot believe Irene actually wrote down everything she was planning. She wanted to steal not just Allison, but Martin and their whole life too. The security footage gave me some chills, not gonna lie, about rewriting history so that I had never existed at all. Martin read over my shoulder, his face gray. He'd been a pawn in a game he didn't even know was being played. His grief and exhaustion had made him the perfect target for manipulation. We spent the afternoon in the house, reclaiming each room. Mom helped, suggesting small changes that would make the space ours again, moving furniture, changing curtains, small acts of ownership that pushed Irene's presence out. By evening, the house felt different. Not quite home yet, but no longer enemy territory. Martin asked again if we'd come back. I told him soon, maybe another week. I needed to be sure Irene was truly gone, not just physically, but from our lives completely. That night, Irene made one final attempt. She showed up at Mom's house after dark, hammered and desperate. She pounded on the door, demanding to see Allison, claiming she was the only real mother, threatening to expose my supposed instability to everyone. Mom called the police while I stayed upstairs with Allison. Through the window, I watched officers arrive, saw them talking to Irene. She gestured wildly, pointed at the house, tried to show them documents on her phone. But hammered and hysterical, she only proved our point. The officers escorted her to her car, followed her to ensure she left the neighborhood. One returned to check on us, taking another report. The pattern of harassment was now officially documented. The next morning, Martin's lawyer called with news. Irene's own attorney had reached out. Seeing the evidence against her, he'd advised Irene to cease all contact and abandon any claims. The forged documents would be corrected without contest. She would stay away or face harassment charges. It was over. Not with a dramatic confrontation or legal battle, but with Irene's quiet retreat in the face of truth. Her house of cards had collapsed, leaving her with nothing but the delusions she'd built. Martin began the process of correcting the documents. Each agency, each office, each system that had accepted Irene's forgeries now restored my identity. Birth certificates, insurance, medical records. One by one, I became Allison's mother again in the eyes of bureaucracy. A week later, we moved back home. The house felt different now. The walls held memories of violation, but also of reclamation. Every room bore Martin's efforts to restore what had been taken, to make amends through action. The nursery became my sanctuary. I spent hours there with Allison, rocking her, reading to her, simply being her mother without interference. The yellow walls caught the light exactly as I'd imagined. The mobile my mother made cast gentle shadows. Everything Irene had tried to steal, returned. Martin gave me space to heal. He slept in the guest room, the one that had been Irene's. He'd stripped it bare, painted it a neutral gray. Nothing of her remained. He was patient, understanding that trust would take time to rebuild. We established new routines. Morning feedings without someone hovering. Afternoon walks without permission. Evening baths without criticism. Simple acts of motherhood that felt revolutionary after months of being denied them. The pediatrician visits were mine now. The staff, aware of what had happened, treated me with extra kindness. They celebrated Allison's milestones with me, the ones I'd missed and the new ones I witnessed. Each appointment reclaimed territory Irene had stolen. Friends who'd been contacted by Irene reached out with apologies. They'd been confused by her stories but hadn't known how to help. Now they offered support, playdates, normal social connections that had been severed by Irene's isolation tactics. Martin continued therapy, working to understand how he'd been manipulated. He shared insights when I was ready to hear them, how grief had made him vulnerable, how Irene had exploited his fear of loss, how he'd failed to protect our family when we needed him most. 3 months after Irene's final appearance, I received a letter from her. Not an apology, but a justification. She wrote about her love for Martin, her certainty that they belonged together, how I had been an obstacle to their happiness, how Allison deserved a stable family, which she could have provided. I burned the letter. The smoke curled up into the sky, carrying away her poisonous words. Mom was there holding Allison. Martin stood beside me watching the pages turn to ash. We didn't speak. Nothing needed to be said. Life slowly found its rhythm. Allison learned to sit up, to laugh, to recognize her name. Each milestone was ours to witness without interference. Martin proved himself daily through consistency and presence. The family we'd almost lost began to reform. Different but stronger. The guest room became a playroom. We painted it together, choosing bright colors that erased every trace of its former occupant. Allison's toys toys filled the space that had housed our enemy. Light and laughter replaced darkness and manipulation. I returned to work part-time, finding balance between career and motherhood. The normalcy felt extraordinary after months of chaos. Colleagues who'd wondered about my extended absence welcomed me back without prying questions. Martin and I began couples counseling, not to assign blame, but to understand how we'd reached such a point, how to recognize manipulation, how to protect our family, how to communicate when crisis struck. Tools we should have had from the beginning. The house became home again, new memories layered over the traumatic ones. Allison's first birthday approached, a milestone Irene had probably planned to celebrate as the primary parent. Instead, we planned a small gathering, family and close friends, people who'd supported us through the darkness. Mom helped with preparations, her presence a reminder of how different things could have been if she hadn't arrived that morning, if she hadn't stood up to Irene, if she hadn't provided sanctuary when I needed it most. The night before Allison's birthday, Martin and I stood in the nursery. Our daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the battle that had been fought for her. The yellow walls glowed in the nightlight. The mobile turned slowly, casting familiar shadows. We'd survived, not unscathed, but intact. Irene's attempt to steal our life had ultimately failed. She'd taken months we couldn't recover, created wounds that would leave scars, but she hadn't won. Allison would grow up knowing her real mother, the one who'd nearly died bringing her into the world, the one who'd fought through illness and manipulation to reclaim her, the one who'd never stopped fighting, even when fighting seemed impossible. The story could have ended differently if Martin had remained blind, if I'd been too weak to leave, if Mom hadn't intervened, if Sarah hadn't spoken up, if any link in the chain had broken. Irene might have succeeded, but we'd held together, barely, just enough. Truth had eventually surfaced. Love had outlasted manipulation. Family had proven stronger than delusion. Tomorrow we would celebrate Allison's first year. There would be cake and presents, photos and laughter. Normal birthday joy unmarred by Irene's shadow. A simple celebration that felt like the greatest victory. Tonight, though, we stood quietly in the nursery. Two parents who'd almost lost everything, who'd found their way back through pain and persistence, who would spend the rest of their lives grateful for the chance to be exactly who they were, Allison's mother and father. Nothing more needed, nothing less accepted. The yellow walls held us safe. Our daughter slept peacefully. The nightmare had ended. Life, real life, could finally begin. Great ending. They're standing in that beautiful yellow nursery watching baby Allison sleep peacefully, and it's just perfect. After everything they went through with crazy Irene trying to steal their family, they made it through together. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.